Okay, there we are. Well, again, welcome everyone and all of you for returning as we build on the work from last week where we talked about white privilege, and now we're going to be talking about internalized oppression. And so like I mentioned a few seconds ago, one thing I forgot to do last time, but I really want to do this time, especially as we enter this anti-racism training, is to do a land recognition. And so that's just where kind of a behind the scenes, a land recognition is simply where those of us who are in a space, especially in the United States, just recognize the land of the indigenous people who were here before us and are present and past and future caretakers of this land. We recognize that the YMCA, where you all are, is the Miami Nation land and the original homeland of those people. Where I am in South Bend is the Potawatomi homeland, and they are the present, past, present, and future caretakers of these lands. And we want to recognize the harm that settler colonialism inflicted upon those people, and our work to continue to bring those people back into society in a constructive way and help us all move forward in that system of reconciliation. So I just wanted to do that first initial land recognition. Second thing I wanted to do is the same thing we did last time, which is do a little bit of ground rules before we get started. Can I just get a thumbs up from my couple in the back? So, okay, perfect, that works. I can only see those, so that's good. So again, we're gonna start this process by a few ground rules. And we like to define these as love and respect for the process, others, and ourselves. So what I'm gonna do is just walk through these, and if you have any questions or comments, feel free to add to them at the end. So first, we're gonna love and respect the process. And that includes learning as much as we can in this session tonight, and trusting that this process is one of growth and in challenge. So this is going to be hard work. This is not meant to be a comfort zone because we grow best when we're out of our comfort zone. So we're going to love and respect the process by doing that first. We're going to love and respect others by not interrupting when others are speaking. And I know that's hard to do sometimes in this virtual setting, but we're going to try our hardest. We're going to assume that everyone has the very best intentions for being present tonight. We're going to assume that everybody has come to this with the same desire to learn and to grow and to challenge today's society and the barriers that are keeping us apart as people. And we're also going to forgive one another as we move forward with these difficult conversations. A lot of times in the heat of the moment, sometimes we don't have the best language or we don't have the best words to describe how we're feeling or how we might see the world. And sometimes that might mean that others are offended or challenged by what we say. We're going to forgive one another in this space because it is a space of growth and learning. And finally, we're going to have love and respect for ourselves. We're going to allow ourselves to be vulnerable and to share honestly with our struggles and our experiences. We're going to acknowledge pain and discomfort, even if we cannot flee from it in this moment, as our human intuition is. And we're going to be willing to accept new information as it is presented to us. So those are the ground rules for this evening. And that's a good introduction to our topic, which is internalized oppression. So has anybody, and I'm sure it's one of those areas, you know, we all know white privilege, we all know institutional racism, but internalized oppression is something we don't talk about as much. So could I see a show of hands of people in the room who have heard of this concept before? Okay, all right, so it's pretty new. And that's great. That's a great place to start. So what we're going to start with then is this definition. Maybe. There we go. So I'm going to read the definition and then we're going to break it down. And again, if you have any comments, just unmute the room and we can go from there. So the definition for internalized oppression is a concept in which the oppressed group uses the methods of the oppressing group against itself. It occurs when one group perceives an inequality of value relative to another group and desires to be like the more highly valued group. Now, take a step back. That is a very long and convoluted definition there, but we're going to break it down. So internalized oppression, a concept in which the oppressed group, so in our current society, the oppressed group by nature, as we've been talking about, is people of color in our society. They use the methods of the oppressing group being those who are white and white passing, against itself. So it's those in the oppressed group using the tactics of the oppressing group against itself. Second part of this is then it occurs when one group, typically the one on the oppressed end, perceives the inequality of value relative to the other group. So there's something that, in this case, the people of color see as a higher value than that white people possess. Does that make sense? So again, we're looking at the oppressed group using the methods that the oppressing group is using against itself. And this idea of internalized oppression by its name shows us that this is a very individual thing. And I want to stop here and kind of give two disclaimers. The first disclaimer is that not all oppressed groups experience internalized oppression. So for example, there are plenty of people in this country, people of color in this country, who are very, very proud of who they are. They're very, very proud of their culture and their way of life and where they come from in that struggle. But that doesn't mean that every individual feels that way. And some have this internalized oppression. The second disclaimer I want to kind of work with is the fact that internalized oppression, like many of these systems, is not something that's only felt in the realm of racism, right? It is also felt in the homophobia, in transphobia, in gender discrimination. All of these areas can have internalized oppression wrapped around them. The third disclaimer I want to talk about is the fact that, again, I am a white individual, and at that I am a white man. So when it comes to talking about internalized oppression, I am not the expert, because by default, I am the societal standard in many situations. And so I can't always, other than some other identities that I might have, really incorporate or understand what internalized oppression means to those who experience it. So tonight there's a few videos that I'll share with you where we can hear from people of color who have this internalized oppression, that we can really dive in and kind of see it from their perspective, because I recognize that I'm not the expert here. So I'm going to stop there, and I'm going to stop sharing so I can see all of you a little bit better, and see what your initial reactions to this definition and this concept are.
I'm kind of anxious to see your examples to help me better understand it.
We're anxious to hear examples to better understand it.
Great. Okay. Any other reactions to this so far? Okay, we're all stuck. Oh.
In the book, I don't know who's read it, but the book Cast by Isabel Wilkerson, I think she talks about this as well. It's like you're trying to identify with the higher caste than you, okay, so that people perceive you maybe as being closer to that caste than what you actually are. So I think that's kind of the same thing.
Yeah, that's actually a really good example. And the most, I don't want to say the most famous, but the most infamous maybe caste in the world that's well known is that of India. India has a very strict caste system where lighter skinned individuals are kind of at the top of society and darker skinned individuals are kind of at the bottom of society. And we see that in other societies, including our own, but India's has been there for a long, long time. And that often comes into play in politics and law and all sorts of stuff in India. Oftentimes those in the most impoverished settings are the darker skinned, and those in like the higher offices in government and business are lighter skinned. So caste systems really emphasize this as well. Any other reactions so far? Okay, so what we're going to do now is a few things. The first thing is we're going to kind of show how this internalized oppression comes about. And the way I'm going to do that is through a list. So as we did last time, I'm going to share my screen. And what's on the screen is a list of characteristics, or a list of statements, I should say. And as we walk through these statements, I'm just going to have you sit there with that statement for 10, 15 seconds and consider if it's true or false. If you have, oh, you do have the PowerPoint in front of you. That's great. I forgot. So you will see those statements. If you want to write a T for true and an F for false next to them, feel free. But we're just going to kind of think through these statements by ourselves for about 10 to 15 seconds each and consider with me whether it's true or false. I'm going to share my screen. Okay. So believing lies, society's messages. The first one, kids who get Fs in school are not as smart as kids who get As. Is that true or false? The next one, only an A grade is acceptable for a smart person who will be successful. Is that true or false? If you are not making A's, you're in danger of not going to college, not getting a job, not living the American dream, and failing in society. Is that true or false? Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Something we hear very often. Is that true or false? Last one on this slide. People of different weights and sizes can be beautiful, but the goal is to reach an ideal thin weight. True or false? Move into the next slide for those following along in the room. First statement on this slide, real men don't cry. And that should say men, not mean. Clearly I was writing this late at night, but is that true or false? The next one, if you don't go to college, you will not have as a fulfilling or as stable a life as if you do go to college. True or false? Next one. Beauty boils down to how attractive you are to others, how many people want you or like you. True or false? The next one. If you are poorer than others, that is a source of shame, even if you work really hard. True or false? And the last one here, if you are richer than others, that's a source of pride, especially if you worked really hard for it. True or false? So looking back at your list here, and give me a thumbs up when one of you or somebody's, we're good, we've reflected a little bit on, okay, good. I just like to see eyes. It's hard to do that over Zoom. But as you thought about these statements, share your reaction. Which ones do you think were true? Which ones do you think were false?
I took them as supposed to all be false, essentially.
He said he thinks they're all false.
You caught me. So these are often messages that we hear in society, right? These are things that you could hear on a daily basis. I know, I feel like my generation grew up a little bit differently than some, but I mean, even to this day, like hearing the phrase real men don't cry is a very prevalent message that society tells us. Oftentimes, especially in recent years, the idea of going to college was seen as a thing to achieve the American dream, right? Which statement stuck out to you as like, I've heard this all my life and I haven't considered whether it was true or false?
I would agree that all of these are false, but in real life, a lot of people don't believe. I mean, they're treated as if these are true, even though when we stop and think about them, yeah, they're false. But in in life, they turn out to be, they're applied as they're true in a lot of cases.
Yeah.
I think.
Yes.
And I think
I agree.
we internally believe them. Like, to answer your question, Brett, the people of different weights and sizes can be beautiful, but the
Uh-huh.
goal is to be thin. I mean, that
Right.
society has taught us that, right?
So what's your name in the yellow shirt?
Margaret.
Margaret, I'm going to hand my book over to you and you're going to teach the rest of the class because that was a really great answer. And yeah, we do treat these things as correct, right? I know, so this is a weird kind of example with the weight loss thing, but in high school, I was super skinny. I could not gain weight no matter how much my mom fed me. I drank whole milk because she was like, you need to put fat on. And then I got to college and I started putting weight on and I felt like a source of shame. I was like, I'm not as skinny as I used to be when I needed to gain weight, And so just like those little things that we operate as if they're not true, but then they actually like in our mind are true. That's what we're kind of getting at here. So these are these messages from society that oftentimes we don't stop and think about. And like when we do, we understand that they're false. But when presented with them in real life, we just consider them to be true. It's the default that they're true, right? And so we call these believing lies because these are things in our daily lives that oftentimes are told to us, and we just kind of go with the assumption that they're true. And I wonder if anybody else has any experiences in their life that they believed a lie and it kind of impacted a part of their life, or it kind of set them on a maybe not so healthy road. If anybody is willing or vulnerable to share kind of an example of that, understanding that we also all hold a lot of privilege in this room as well.
I think one of them that this society's always taught me is to not be vulnerable. Like, don't show your weakness, don't cry in front of people. Like, you're only going to achieve your status or your whatever you chase after if you don't show weakness.
That's a really good one. America has a really good, what do we call it? Like a very white Anglo-Saxon Protestant idea of like holding down our emotions, keep the stiff upper lip. Our British ancestors gave us that really well, I think, in some respects. Any other lies that you believe throughout the years?
I can't think of anything personally, although I'm sure there are many. But my granddaughter, who just recently graduated from college, when she was in high school, she had learning disabilities, I guess, or I don't know, she had a terrible time, ADHD, had a terrible time with organization and got her grade. I mean, we kept our fingers crossed that she was even going to graduate from high school. And she is the most creative, really. I mean, she ended up graduating from Berklee College of Music, and she's going into music therapy. And but if you look at her grades from high school, you would say this girl is never going to amount to anything. And also, she's overweight, or she's an overweight girl, but she's learned to be very proud of her body. She stays physically fit, but she just, that's her body type, and she's very proud of, she doesn't feel ashamed of it. So I think that's several of these that apply to her.
Yeah. And I think about in high school, and I'm sure you can all think back to your high school days as well, of the damage that often did to us. So whether it was weight or grades or just like our general outlook on life, we were all anxious teenagers about something at some point in our life, and how that impacted us in those years. before we go into the next part here, this is one part of the curriculum. So this curriculum is specifically designed for youth groups and for church groups. And so there's often a lot of scripture and Judeo-Christian references in these presentations. And usually I try to pull them out a little bit so we can have a little bit more of a secular conversation in this space. However, this is one story that I think really kind of presents internalized oppression really, really well. And so I want to keep that in tonight. And it's the story of Jacob. So if you're familiar, Jacob is one of the Old Testament patriarchs in the Judeo-Christian tradition. And so you don't have to have any familiarity with this story to kind of understand it. I'll just kind of read it or read part of it here, and we'll break it down a little bit more. So if you'll bear with me here. So Jacob was born grasping his twin brother's heel. And so they named him Jacob, which means he grasps the heel. Unfortunately, grasping someone's heel was also an idiom for tripping someone up or deceiving someone, taking advantage of them. And names were very important in the Bible. They were that person's identity. So every day of his life, the message was reinforced to Jacob that he was a deceiver. That's what he was, nothing else, no more, no less. Jacob started believing that message. And when he believed it, he started living it. He cheated his brother out of his birthright. He deceived his father into giving him the better blessing. He broke those relationships until he had to flee. He ran to his uncle Laban, where he met his match. They took turns deceiving and cheating each other until that relationship was so broken he had to flee. Jacob found himself caught between two people he had wronged. He was fleeing from his uncle whom he had wronged, and had no place to go except toward his brother, whom he had wronged. The night before he knew he had to face his brother, he was struggling with choices he had made and who he was. God met him there, and they wrestled together with who he was, and God ended up telling him, "You are not Jacob, or deceiver, but Israel, someone who wrestles with God and struggles, but does that with God." And that became a major understanding of the identity of not just Israel the man, but Israel the nation. When he believed the message from others about who he wasn't whole. He wasn't whole, and he lived into that negative message. When he believed the message from God about who he was able to have right relationships with God and with others. It transformed his life, his sense of his own identity, his sense of value, and he became a whole, transformed person. The same goes for us. When we believe the messages that others send about what makes us vulnerable or valuable, we live into that and we pursue the wrong things. But when we believe the message that God gives about how we are valuable, it is freeing and makes us whole. We are all receiving false messages about what makes us valuable. But in particular, society sends the message that people of color are not as valuable as white people. Black and white people are socialized to believe that when people of color believe those messages, it's called internalized oppression. They believe the false messages that they are not as valuable. And we're going to dive into an example here. So what I'm going to share my screen with now, if I can find my keyboard here, is a video called A Girl Like Me. And like I mentioned before, let's see if this is going to work for me. There we go. It's called A Girl Like Me. And so this curriculum that we're basing this off tonight is from the Diocese of Atlanta, the Episcopal Diocese of Atlanta. And they took the initiative to kind of record some conversations around this because they knew the Episcopal Church is like 98% white. And they know that a lot of people who are doing this curriculum don't have people of color to call upon to explain this, nor should people of color have to explain this to us. So they just took the opportunity to record a young person of color talking about internalized oppression. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen and we're going to watch this video together.
My journey of internalized oppression started at a really young age. I remember being the only Black student up until 3rd grade. And so that started the thoughts in my head of, I didn't know when I first understood that being Black was bad, but I understood that I was different, and the way I was different seemed to be wrong. And so I remember in middle school that there was clearly a white table and a Black table. And even though I would sit at the Black table, sometimes I would actively try to sit at the white table because instinctively I knew that my life would be better if I sat at the white table. And so once I started to be accepted into the white community, it started this long journey of me trying so hard to assimilate to white culture. And so that began me trying to just denounce everything that was Black culture, and I tried to deny everything about me that was Black. And I remember actually in middle school, one of my classmates called me an Oreo, and my teacher overheard and got really upset and made my classmate apologize to me. And I couldn't understand why, because I took it as a compliment. I literally thought that was okay for someone to say I was Black on the outside but white on the inside. And so it just started this whole deep spiral of me essentially like hating myself, but not even knowing I hated myself, because internally I was just feeding myself these messages, or I was just seeing in society. I didn't really watch movies that had like predominantly Black characters, or I didn't really read books that had I didn't really know of any. And so all of the characters in my life were predominantly white. And so even internally in my head, I was white, even though like on the outside I was clearly Black. And so there was just such a disassociation with who I actually was. And because my parents are immigrants from Guyana, which is in South America, and it was so much easier to be disassociated with Black culture, because I was like, oh, I'm not really Black, I'm Guyanese, I'm West Indian, and I could use that as a way to kind of, again, disassociate myself from being Black. And then also, I think, especially in the Black community, hair is a big deal. And because my hair was a different texture, people would ask me like, what are you? Where are you from? All this stuff. And so it would also instill like a pride thing in me, because I was like, oh, they can see I'm different. They can see I'm not really Black. And so then I would also get these messages of like, wow, you speak really well. Wow, you sound so polite, or you speak so white, or you act white. And again, I thought those were all compliments, because I told that was, if you wanted to be ahead in society, like that's how you should act. And it wasn't until after college when God met me in a moment of me realizing like my whole life, like I essentially hated myself without even knowing like how much I hated myself. And so it was really painful to bring up all those things, because I didn't even know. But thankfully, God is so gracious, and He instilled in me, and He was speaking to me, you're beautiful the way I made you to be, and your skin is beautiful, and He delights in who I am and in the color of my skin. It's not something to be ashamed of, but something to be proud of. And so God started me on this journey of what it means to love myself, and to really start to look for those people who are strong people of color, and just really diving into that God has made us all unique, and that we are beautiful no matter what, and no matter what our skin color is, like God made us that way. And so it's a lot. Racial reconciliation is a lifelong journey of going into those painful things, and especially as a person of color, as someone who actively tried to, disassociate from my Blackness, and to dive into all those painful memories of people saying things to me and how wrong I felt or bad I felt. it's hard, but it's worth it because people really don't know that what the Black experience is like. And so as a person of color, it's important to, even though this is my personal experience and my personal experience is not the same as another person of color's experience, but it is important that I share how I grew up, things that I've gone through, because so that way people can understand that the Black experience is different, and that we need to be able to go into those painful parts so that way beauty can come from the ashes. And as I'm going into being a missionary in Italy, where again I'll be a minority, it's important that I hold steadfast to my identity in Christ and who God has made me to be, but also
The rest of the video is about her mission in Italy, but that's kind of the example that I really love to pull about internalized oppression, because she speaks so straight from her heart in what that experience has been for her and how she realized it. Because again, understanding our white privilege is understanding that we are the default in most situations, in all situations in the United States. The way our hair is, the way our skin looks, the way we act, our cultural things, are all things that are the default. And that can often have really devastating impacts on people who aren't that default. I wanted to get your initial reactions to this video before we watch another short video. But what are your initial reactions to that and hearing from that experience?
It makes me sad that people of that beauty, both inside and out, have to go through that. I mean, that, somebody in this country shouldn't have to go through that.
I'll say I found that extremely relatable, to the point when she started crying. I started thinking back on some of my experiences, and she was pretty much telling my story there for a while.
Do you think parents encouraged her assimilation or trying to achieve the whiteness? You kind of wonder, especially they were immigrants. I think that's a very common experience of immigrants to fit in, to acculturate.
I think it
Which
probably
is- yeah.
depends on, because the whole topic's internalized oppression. So for that particular family, that might have been something that they were taught to do to assimilate here.
Yeah.
Whereas I know some families who really are proud and should be of their heritage, and they teach their kids to be proud, of their heritage. So it probably, who knows? It probably just depends.
You're right.
I think,
That she took that probably is more likely the parents, were practicing some of the same.
yeah, that's
Speaking from if you don't mind, Brad.
Sure, please.
Just from my experience, I bet that was something that she consciously or subconsciously did on her own, and probably didn't share that with her family. I know, like my experience, I had a very loving and supportive family and many friends that really cared about me, but I also would think that I was protecting my family by not sharing these things and keeping these within myself. And I just moved forward on my own, and nobody really realized what I was feeling on the inside, to the point where then I was like those feelings were dulled and they didn't really exist. They did, but then I wasn't really experiencing them in the moment.
Thank you all for sharing. I think one thing we often say in America that we don't truly understand the implications of is this idea of we're a melting pot, right? And oftentimes a melting pot is a nice image for Americans because it signifies that we welcome everybody and that, you know, we're a nation from all backgrounds. But oftentimes a melting pot or a soup is something that melts down or changes the substance of those of the metals, right? So you put things in a melting pot, it changes the substance of the metal, it changes what they're like. And that's often what we've done in America. I know, like, my family spoke German up until the First World War, but during the First World War, it was not popular to be German, understandably. And so, I mean, that's not the same as internalized oppression in people of color, but that's an example of how we have created this idea of a melting pot that actually causes harm and kind of erases cultural awareness and cultural pride in ourselves. So, I mean, thank you all again for sharing and being willing to be vulnerable in this situation. We have about 20 minutes left, and I want to share one more video. This is one that I have not used before, so let me know if you like it or not. But I'm going to make this full screen. It's another example, again, because this topic is so specific and I am not the expert on it. This is why I'm trying to bring in people who are the expert on this topic. And I hope you understand why I'm relying on videos so much this evening. So let me share this here. Maybe. There.
Every black female has a big butt and big boobs.
Loud, obnoxious, ghetto.
Light skin being more attractive than dark skin.
We're not smart. We're this way, we're that way. And a lot of times we have to prove ourselves as not being true.
At a young age, I already knew the standards for a girl like me. As I become older, they become more obvious.
You have to have permed hair, relaxed hair.
You know, straight hair or like blonde hair, you know, long waves or something.
And if it's natural, that's good hair. Like bad hair is hair you have to relax because it's kinky.
Like it's not like appealing to have like natural hairstyles, or like if they are natural, they have to be like the curly head like black girls or something that looks mixed or something.
And I remember when I first started wearing my hair natural, at first my mom was okay with it and she thought it looked nice. And then after like the second day, she was like, oh, stop that. She was like, you're starting to look African. I was like, well, I am African. And that really pissed me off.
There are standards that are imposed upon us, like, you know, you're prettier if you're light-skinned.
I knew people in the past that like just like wanted to be light-skinned, not for any particular reason, you know, because they love themselves. I mean, they love themselves except for, you know, the color of their skin.
Like my siblings are all lighter than me, and my mom, she's dark-skinned, but she's lighter than me. So like I noticed, and I was like, hey, how come I'm the darkest, and you know everybody else is so light? And I don't know. Since I was younger, I also considered being lighter as a form of beauty, or you know, beautiful than being dark skinned. So I used to think of myself as being ugly because I was dark skinned.
I knew people who actually like went out there and got, you know, bleaching cream and everything. They actually like laid in the tub, like poured like capfuls of bleach into it just so they could like see if their skin would get lighter.
But yeah, my aunt that lives in Honduras, she basically started using skin bleaching cream when she was about 25. And she started her oldest daughter on it when she was about 11. And then she has an even younger daughter that was about 6 when she started using the skin bleaching cream on her.
I've seen people say that I would never marry a dark-skinned man because, you know, because I don't want that in my gene pool.
On the other hand, light-skinned girls have their issues too. We've been called high yellow, conceited, house nigga. I feel like both sides have their issues.
I guess I sort of felt like there was not any attention towards me because of maybe my skin color or because my hair was kinky or, you know, just basically that. Or even when I was younger, like, say there was, I don't know, a doll. I used to have a lot of dolls, but most of them were just white dolls with long straight hair that I would comb, and I would be like, oh, I wish I was just like this Barbie doll.
In Brown versus Board of Education, the famous case that desegregated schools in the 1950s, Dr. Kenneth Clark conducted a doll test with black children. He asked them to choose between a black doll and a white doll. In most instances, the majority of the children preferred the white doll. I decided to reconduct this test as Dr. Clark did to see how we've progressed since then. Can you show me the doll that you like best or that you'd like to play with?
This one. I like that one. I can. This one.
That one?
This one. I like to play with this.
And can you show me the doll that is the nice doll? And why is that the nice doll?
She's white.
And can you show me the doll that looks bad? Okay. And can you and why does that look bad?
Because it's black.
And why do you think that's a nice doll?
Because she's white.
And can you give me the doll that looks like you?
"15 out of the 21 children preferred the white doll.
Our ancestors came to this country and they were pretty much ripped out of their culture. You know, they couldn't speak their language. They couldn't, you know, they couldn't be themselves. They had to be like what everybody else told them to be.
When you don't know where you're from and you don't know what country you're from, all you know is basically you're from Africa, that's all you're given, I feel like it brings on like a lot of ignorance and it builds a lot of anger. I've seen it build a lot of anger in a lot of black young females. Like, I don't know, they feel like because they feel like they have a right to disown any kind of, you know, African roots.
I think for a black girl in general, it's like you're missing a piece of you, you know? And for me, yeah, it's like, oh, I don't have any actual heritage, not heritage, but culture. Like, I know I'm from Africa, but you know, the different countries in Africa have their different cultures, their different morals, their different values, and not knowing that just it sort of keeps us at a loss, and I feel like we're busy searching for it while everybody else in society is throwing their ideas and what they believe we should be at us. But you know, personally, we know that's not what we should be, but we're gonna take it because we don't know exactly what it is that we should be because we don't really know where we came from.
Forgot I was muted. That can be really hard to watch as we think about this idea of race in America and internalized oppression. There's so much that people of color are told through the white lens about what is good, what is beautiful, what is successful. And I want to sit with that video for a quick moment, 30 seconds, just to kind of gather your thoughts. And then if you're willing, kind of share your initial reactions to that video.
I personally feel nauseous.
I remember the first, oh, sorry.
Watching these children, it is like they're awful like the white child because I felt like the black girl was bad.
And then to watch that little girl's eyes and say, which one looks like you? And you knew she wanted to, you could just tell
kind of
she
see what was
wanted
going
to
through
pick the white one. And it's, oh, just makes me so sick.
these are things that they're so deeply ingrained. It's so psychological and societal, and we've pushed this narrative. I remember the first time I watched that thinking how I have never thought of my race. I have never thought of myself as white. I don't know why. It's just, and I think, and that is the perception in the United States, is that when you're white, you don't have to think about these things. And yet that is so all consuming, even from as young of an age as 5. And what does that mean as someone who is a person of color in those situations? And I wanted to do one more activity here that kind of shows how these societal images are sent and reinforced in society. And so I'm going to share my screen again. And you'll notice I'm doing, I did not want to do that. One second. Let's see. Okay, there it is. So you can see here, I've used an incognito tab for the sole purpose of getting around algorithms. But when you search beautiful people, you see all these different varieties of people. And I will say, when I started doing these trainings, this page was almost exclusively white. But after a year like 2020, thankfully, society has caught on in some way, and we see a lot more people of color in this category. But just searching beautiful people, you know, a lot of these are white individuals. And we see more people of color in them than there used to be, which is really heartening. If you search successful people, a vast majority of this page is white. And if they're not white, their color is somehow subdued, like this image here. There are 2 people of color in that image, and yet it's a different graphic design, so that they all kind of look the same. Again, you can scroll down here, the classic white male, 3 white people, the white billionaires with maybe 1 person of color. Again, these are things that people see in our Google searches. If you search smart people, we have a page of almost exclusively white people, including a majority that are Albert Einstein. But you scroll down, we have 1 person of color. We have 1 Asian person here. We're about halfway down the page, and there's only 1 person. We have another person of color. So these are our Google searches. This means that when people are trying to find people like themselves, this is what comes up, right? So the automatic default here is that white is good somehow. If we go to rich people, this is a British aristocracy, Donald Trump, Great Gatsby. Again, white people, white people, white people. We have 1 person of color, but I think it's a presentation that 2 white people are giving down here. More white people, we have it. So again, as we scroll down, this is a very white page. So if I want to be a rich person someday, or if I'm searching for rich individuals, rich role models, I see completely white people. If I go to CEOs, again, on this page, I see 1, 2 people of color on this first initial page. As we scroll down, there's another person of color, another person of color. We get down a little bit more diverse. That's great. Again, I'm not sure this would have been true 5 years ago, right? I tried to connect some Whitley County examples. So when you search American farmer, a majority are still white, but there is some people of color, which is great. Again, we get down, there's more white. But knowing that a majority of the farmers in the world are people of color. Granted, I searched American farmers to prove a point here, but that's another one. Teachers. This is one that struck me because I was trying to think of things that are in Whitley County a lot. These are almost exclusively white teachers. There are a few examples of people of color. We scroll down, a few more examples. But again, a majority are white. And to think, a lot of times people criticize this by saying, well, the majority of America is still white. Well, the majority of the world, which uses Google, are people of color. So if you're a young person trying to find your way in life, trying to find careers, oftentimes, this is why representation matters. I get this question a lot. Why does it matter we had a Black president? Why does it matter we have a gay member of the cabinet? Why does it matter we had XYZ person XYZ position of power. And it's often because we have so internalized this idea that it's white is right, that it does so much psychological harm to those who are not that standard, right? So that's what I want to sit with for a few minutes here, in that, what images do you see in your daily life as you really think from your, when you get up in the morning to when you go to bed at night? What are some images that you realize now might force people to internalize that oppression that is sent through those messages?
I'm not entirely sure what you're asking.
Oh, I'm sorry. So the messages we receive every day, if we're looking at, let me back up one step. So internalized oppression is a very societal thing. It's very rarely something that me, one white person can do to an entire race of people, right? But what messages in media do you see throughout your day that might reinforce this system of internalized oppression? Does that make sense? A great example for.
I think we used to see, I mean, anything on, say, let's say even 5 years ago, 4 years ago, commercials of, happy, mom, dad, little kids, families, and the commercials, all white. And I think it's changing a lot, which is good. I think you're seeing a lot more people of color, and, just, and the commercial doesn't really have anything to do, like, it's not for hair straighteners or something like that, a product that's typical to them. It's just for any mainstream product. And even mixed race couples and same-sex couples in commercials. So I think that's improving, but that would have been, some, in the not too recent past, that would have been a very much of an example. And I guess
I think when you go down the toy aisle, the toy aisle has almost all white toys. I mean, there's a few non-white now, but I think one of the other things, news anchors are almost all white, and for a while we're almost all men.
That's changing too, though.
Yeah.
Well, it's on some stations, on some news stations.
I feel like in the last,
some it's not.
I feel like since last year happened, I've seen so much more marketing and like just they're trying, I guess.
Yeah, that's right. I think it's improving.
I mean, even things like, baby Jesus in the manger, you don't see many Black baby Jesuses, but he certainly wasn't white.
Yeah.
That's a really good example, and one that I grew up in Whately County, so I feel like I can say this. In a county that is predominantly white and predominantly some form of Christian, that is one that is really stressed, is this idea of like a white Jesus. I would encourage you, if you're religious in any way, to go look up icons, Greek Orthodox icons of Black Jesus, Asian Jesus. There's some really great art that cultures have done to kind of incorporate their own culture into Christianity and to see Jesus in their own way, which is amazing. Another one is the idea of welfare. When you say welfare, when politicians especially say welfare, they typically mean people of color. People of color are the classic 80s term welfare queens, right? However, 40% of welfare recipients are actually white, and only about 25% are African American. But our perception is that welfare recipients are predominantly African Americans, right? And that's how the word is used often when thinking about welfare. It's an inner city Black problem, not a rural white problem, which it actually is. Another example is the idea of criminals, whereas 39% of the prison population is white, while 40% of the prison population is Black, which is almost even. However, only 13% of the US population is Black. So there's a great disparity in that. But when you think of prison, you think of Black people, even though it's almost exactly the same ratio as white people. Another good example is undocumented workers or undocumented people. Everybody thinks Hispanic, right? Someone from Mexico or another Latin American country. The largest group of undocumented workers are actually those from Europe who overstay their visas on visits. It's white people, folks. But when we talk about undocumented workers, who do politicians want us to think of? Those who do not look like us. These are all ways that we, as people who vote, as people who are in these circles who have the power in society, reinforce internalized oppression. But I do want to end, not on a high note, but on a note of action, I should say, which is that we are going to follow the model we had last time, which is learn, act, and share. So how are we going to learn? Tonight, coming back next time, engaging in these topics is how we're going to learn. On your page, there is a link to more anti-racism resources. This is, like was mentioned in the video, this is a lifelong journey of racial reconciliation, especially for people like us, like me, who are white, who have to really recognize the privilege we have in this country and work to correct that. So I encourage you to go to that resource. Acting, I want you to take these slides away and consider these questions of how can we challenge these cultural perceptions in our daily life? How can we think about our wording? Is this phrase something that reinforces the idea of internalized oppression and my place at the top of the racial food chain in this country? And then finally, how can we share this with people in our spheres? So how can we engage with people around us so that our education doesn't only stay with us, but actually goes beyond us and serves society in a larger way? And my last point, I can stop sharing here since you have the slides. My last point I want to share is understanding that internalized oppression has done a lot of psychological harm to minorities in this country. It is not just people of color, even though that is our topic tonight, and it is probably most prominent in that group. It is in all aspects of life. It is in LGBTQ people. It is in people who are differently able than us. It is in people who might have different body types than the standard societal body type. Any societal standard and any deviation from that, those deviations have this internalized oppression in whatever way it comes through. Oftentimes you hear things like internalized racism. That's when it's internalized in this obviously racial atmosphere. You can hear things such as internalized homophobia when it's used against gay people. So this is a concept that is broad and deep and more than we can cover in an hour and 1 minute. And I realize I'm over, I'm sorry. But thank you again for being here. And I hope you can take something away and consider and move forward as a more educated individual here.
Do I have any questions? Any questions? Any thoughts before we let him leave? Okay. Awesome, Brett, you are fantastic, dude. Thank you so much.
Thank you all very much. I appreciate it. Best of luck until I see you next time, hopefully. Can you remind me or them as well what the next event is here?
I think it's April 15th. We skip a week because of spring break. Yep, April 15th at 7 o'clock is our next one.
See you all then.
All right, thank you.
Bye.